Thank you so much, Representative Benz. Those were very useful questions for the committee to understand further these issues. And the chair will now recognize the gentleman from Hawaii, Representative Case.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. Chair Ayla, first of all, thank you for your kind comments. You have been at this a lot longer than me through a whole range of areas, from ocean conservation to supervising and discharging our obligations to our natural resources, and of course in the Native Hawaiian community. So I thank you for your service. I want to emphasize or put some emphasis on the relevance of your testimony here to this committee in support of HJA Res 55. And so let's just review the history here. The Hawaiian Homes Commission Act was passed in 1921. The federal government was responsible for the discharge of its obligations and for the administration and implementation of that act for 39 years until statehood for Hawaii in 1959. In 1959, we became a state. And under the Admissions Act, we, the people of Hawaii, undertook the direct obligation to discharge the responsibility of the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act to the beneficiaries of the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act. And that obligation was then a state of Hawaii obligation. And the obligation is carried out through the Department of Hawaiian Homelands and the Hawaiian Homes Commission. And you are chair of the Hawaiian Homes Commission. So when you speak here today, in support of HJA Res 55, you are speaking as, I would call it, the point of the spear for the state of Hawaii's obligation to the beneficiaries. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct, and it also comes with the weight of the commission. The commission voted to support this resolution.
Right, absolutely. So this is us speaking through you, all of us, not just Native Hawaiians, all of us in the state, speaking through you and telling this committee that this is what the state of Hawaii wants to do.
Yes, as it was pointed out by Chair Fernandez, and it was very clear. There is overwhelming support here in the state of Hawaii.
And I just want to emphasize that as well, because again, the law today, the federal law today, provides the state of Hawaii the right to amend the federal law in some cases, and the right to amend the federal law with the consent of Congress in other cases. And we're in the latter category here, right? So we have already amended this law in the state legislature, subject only to the consent of Congress.
That is correct, Representative Case.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chair. Let me go back to a point that Ms. Radewagen was asking you about. For the indigenous peoples of our country, housing and the land it's not a commodity. It's an ancestral relationship. You refer to it as the aina in Hawaiian, and that's what we call that obligation, that relationship. For the Native Hawaiian people who live on the Hawaiian homelands, this is their aina. That is a generational relationship with the land, correct?
It is more than that, Representative Case. It is part of the family. It is part of the reciprocal relationship between the people and the aina. So it is something that I think most indigenous communities clearly understand innately. And the answer to your question is yes, absolutely.
Okay, and in that relationship, in that connection, Chair, I think you used the word psychologically devastating to be dispossessed from the land, and I want to put a point on that as well, because in this case, if there is not a way for Ohana family to remain on their ancestral lands because of the application of federal law at some point in what is now 5, maybe 6 generations on the land, the Hawaiian homelands, that dispossession is not just a dispossession from that land. The practical reality is that given the rate of home ownership for Native Hawaiians in Hawaii and that very high price of housing that you pointed out, they will most likely be dispossessed from Hawaii itself. Would you not say that that's a realistic reality of it?
It is, Representative Case, and we see every day the outmigration of Native Hawaiians to the continent because of that.
Okay, thank you. And then And then just the final point that I want to agree with you on, which is that oftentimes some people phrase this as a false choice between continuing homesteaders on the land and allowing those on the waiting list to come on the land. And that is a false choice because we do have the option, of course, of increasing the availability of homes on the land, which we are all dedicated to doing, correct?
That is correct. And we worked hard every day along with the congressional delegation and the legislature to do so.
Thank you again so much for your testimony and for your service. I yield back.
Mahalo.
Thank you very much, Representative. The chair would now recognize Representative Case, the gentleperson from Hawaii.
Good morning and aloha, Madam Chair, members, witnesses. First of all, I note, as well as Ms. Radewagen, that I'm a very proud co-sponsor of HJ Res 55 with Congressman Kahele, strong supporter of this, and I'll get into that a little bit with my questioning later. I also, Madam Chair, want to thank you personally in front of this committee for taking time out of your precious personal family vacation time recently to understand Native Hawaiians generally back in our home state, as well as the Hawaiian homelands. Your visit to the Keaukaha Hawaiian homelands to appreciate personally the vision and the reality of the Hawaiian homelands on the ground meant everything to Congressman Kahele and me, and everything to Hawaiian homeland folks throughout the country. That was really a nice gesture, so thank you for that. Mr. Smith, last year, we dealt with the question of the participation of Native Hawaiians in certain programs and protections under the urban Indian organizations. The specific question was on a bill by Mr. Gallego having to do with coverage of urban Indian organizations under the Federal Tort Claims Act. That bill was eventually passed very early this year. However, the question was whether Native Hawaiians should be covered and get the same tort coverage as they are and remain integrally part of the Urban Indian Organization, although they're not technically part of the Indian Health Service. They contract for services when folks that are eligible under the Indian Health Service, for example, are in Hawaii. Those are Native Hawaiian healthcare organizations that provide those services, and yet they do not have that coverage. And so that was a matter of debate. At the time, Director Weaki testified in this committee that he would support the inclusion of Native Hawaiians. So that's unfinished business. But I mention it as a prelude to my question, which is, in your view, what consultation under HR 5221 or otherwise would be owed, would be appropriate for other indigenous peoples who are not directly in the urban Indian or the Indian Healthcare Service when they are not specifically eligible? Do you have a comment on Native Hawaiians in particular?
Thank you very much, Representative Case, for the question and comment. And certainly, this is an area that we are tracking closely and stand ready to provide technical assistance on if and when requested. But certainly, as it comes to tribal consultation, we stand ready to share our experience on some of the critical events that have played out throughout our history as a federal agency in working with tribal governments as a form of communication that emphasizes trust, respect, shared responsibility, working towards mutual decision making if possible. If and when possible, we certainly believe this is a policy that has benefited American Indian and Alaska Native tribes, and would certainly be willing to share our experience with Native Hawaiians.
Well, excuse me, Mr. Smith. I think my question is a little bit more direct than sharing it. My question has to do with: do you undertake any consultation obligation, or do you think it's a good idea to consult with Native Hawaiian organizations when Native Hawaiians are providing services in a culturally appropriate way to other indigenous peoples under the Indian Health Service?
Certainly, we'd be welcome to conversations and any impact that may impact tribes or their members. And certainly if there's an opportunity to elevate some of those impacts to tribal leadership, we would certainly assist in serving as a conduit for those conversations.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I do support this bill, by the way. I just want to make sure that Native Hawaiians are recognized as part of the penumbra of these services, whether they technically, formally are covered or not right now. Thank you. I yield back, Madam Chair.